Hi everybody, we're going to continue on with our trace evidence. We're going to talk about fibers. A few things we want to understand is that most fibers do not degrade easily over time. They are also transferred easily from one object or person to another. That is Locard's principle. And then fibers can provide evidence of association between a suspect and a crime scene, and most fiber evidence can only be placed within a class. Remembering that class evidence is evidence that can be traced back to a group of individuals, where individual evidence being evidence that can trace back to a single source. So there are some interesting characteristics about fiber evidence. So one of the cool things as we observe some of the samples here provided is that clearly some of our fiber evidence is of animal origin and therefore will have its own unique set of characteristics, such as the cuticle structure on the outside. We also have some fiber evidence that comes from plant species, and then we also have fiber evidence that is synthetic, with polyester being an example of that. So, some of the things that will make fiber evidence unique would be the type and length of the fibers that were used, the spinning method that is used to manufacture those synthetic sources of fiber, and the type of fabric construction. All of these will affect the ability for those fibers to be transferred easily, as well as the significance of those fibers and their associations with the crime scene. Oh goodness, sorry, I thought I had a picture on there. Okay. So, what we're going to find that's going to be interesting about fiber evidence is that it's not always easy to associate fibers to one another. So what we have to look at is, what we want to really examine is unique fibers that can be found, because there's many common fibers that make it difficult to make intimate associations about potential contact that occurred during that commission of that crime. So we also want to look at, the secondary thing that we want to check out is cross transfer of those hairs among the suspect's clothing and the victim's clothing, because if we can make cross associations with that transfer, then we increase that ability to make some strong connections with that particular evidence. So just a couple of pictures to gain an idea of some of the things we're discussing here. If we look here to the left, we see that the top left we have it's a cotton fiber, and we're looking at this under magnification, generally using a high-powered stereoscope, and this is a loosely woven cotton shirt. Now look on the bottom right. We are also looking at a source of cotton, but these were manufactured to make jeans. You can see some general structural uniqueness to those fibers, but you can also tell that if I only had a few strands, it may not be easy for me to associate those two fibers as being unique from one another. Now if you look at the top left, the top right and the bottom left, you will see that these are sources of synthetic fibers. Now there's a great difference in the way that these look under the stereoscope magnification than does the cotton fibers. The synthetic fibers tend to be much more neat in the way that those things are woven and manufactured into clothing. So that's what we would be looking for. It'd be awesome to have a cotton versus a synthetic to make an association that could be unique, whereas top left and bottom right, the similarities are too great to necessarily discern or make those fibers unique. And also note, please, that the synthetic fibers tend to be much more smooth in texture. The way that they're woven gives them that additional strength, and then they're generally more shiny in their color, whereas natural fibers tend to be a little bit more dull, and then those outer edges are much more rough in nature. Okay, so just a few more samples here of different hair sources. So we can see here we've got some samples of goat hair, and we're looking at these through a microscope at some magnification. And then we have acrylic wool glass and merino wool. Now if you notice with all of these that there's a difference in the outer structure. With the synthetic, you can see here and agree that the acrylic glass wool is definitely more smooth in character versus the two natural fibers, the goat hair and the merino wool, have a much more rough texture associated with their surface. Okay, so natural fibers. So we've already seen some examples of natural fibers. You're very aware of some of the natural fibers that exist, that they come from different plant and animal species, cotton being one of the most common ones, and something like wool being another common fiber that is of natural source from a sheep. All right, so here are some samples of synthetic or manufactured fibers. We can see here that our looking at these underneath a microscope, we can see these vibrant colors that stand out. When we're looking at a cross section, we'll see some very unique shapes that are associated with those fibers. So just a small fact is that more than half of all fibers are synthetic, which is the same thing as being man-made. And a few examples of that are going to be nylon, rayon, and polyester. These would be considered synthetic fibers. Okay, so collecting hair and fiber evidence. We did talk about hair evidence already, but the fiber follows the same general rule, which is you could use sticky tape, lint roller, special evidence vacuum cleaners. Always make sure that you're using clean forceps, that you're folding those fibers and hairs into small sheets, and then you're storing those. And there is like a folding pattern that they use, and then storing those in a paper bag that's labeled properly. Okay, so just some quick small stuff to gain an understanding is that understand that fibers, especially synthetic, are polymers. So those are repeating units of the same type of structure over a period of time to create that source. And I think we've kind of discussed this already a little bit, but our sources of fibers can come from plants, animals, minerals, and man-made. Uh-oh. All right, so as we've progressed through our Industrial Revolution and beyond, we have a lot of synthetic fibers that are taking over where natural fibers once were the mainstream use. So things that are going to be of interest about our synthetic fibers in a minute is how they are manufactured and the uniqueness of how they're manufactured at different companies, which these characteristics can give synthetic fibers a uniqueness that might not always be apparent otherwise. So one of the cool things about how synthetic fibers are manufactured is how they're spun. Okay, so there are 4 general shapes of man-made fibers, as you can see here on the bottom left picture. We can have round in nature, we can have what's called trilobal, we can have a dumbbell shape, and flat shape. So what they do is they melt or dissolve those polymers and from whatever source that they've used to make those. And then what they do is they're spun through these little holes. So it looks like, resembles what would be like a shower head, or even I think of sort of those little meat attachments so that you can take whole meat like sirloin and ground it yourself at home. And so this is what makes fiber unique to the manufacturer. Okay, so how do we analyze fibers? Much the same way that we were looking at hairs. So we can use a comparison microscope to cross-compare those samples to each other. What we want to look and compare is the color, the diameter, the cross-sectional shape, any type of striation patterns that are going to be unique to the type of equipment that was used to manufacture that. And don't forget again that synthetic fibers are going to have that smooth surface. They're going to be uniform in size and shape versus your animal fibers and plant. What they can also do is run chemical composition of those synthetics. And a lot of times those are done through some different types of chemistry techniques. One is spectroscopy. So refractive index is not a new term for us. We've looked at that several times throughout our units. And then they could also take the dye that was used to make those fiber sources and use thin layer chromatography to gain some inference about the type of materials that are making up that dye. Okay, so just a couple of samples here. You can clearly see that using this infrared analysis here, you can see that the sample on the left and the sample on the right, if you were just looking at the picture only and didn't understand anything else about this process, you could agree that these two materials that make up this fiber are unique from one another because they're not following the same pathway, so to speak. And that is all for our lecture. I hope you enjoyed it.